daybreak, and thank you so much for choosing Citizen TV this morning. This morning we want to take a look at Moi's legacy on education, plus keep an eye on what's happening in Kakamega, the stampede that happened on Monday, leaving 14 pupils dead. Investigations are still ongoing. Nevertheless, here in studio we have education experts to help us go through our topic this morning. Seated on my left, we have Sifuna Otoa. He is a teacher. Good morning. Thank you so much for making time this morning.
Very much.
And of course, next to him is Amos Kaburu, the program manager at People's Education for Learning. Asante sana.
Thank you so much.
And on this other end, we have education expert Kennedy Echesa. Gentlemen, thank you for being here with us this morning. Just a very quick timeline for you, Trevor. Here's the thing. Education seems to be something that was very close to the late President Daniel Arap Moi. He taught in several schools in Cabinet between the years of 1946 to 1955. To be specific now, from 1949 to 1954, the late President, Kenya's second president, taught at a teacher training college in Cabinet, only for him to leave education as an active teacher at 31 years old back in October 18th, 1955. Trevor?
He also taught in Tambach, which is essentially where I went to school.
And here's the thing. Trevor thought there was no Moi boys. Amos, you were schooling him on that one.
Yeah,
no Moi boys.
we were disputing,
Let's do it.
And they argue that perhaps HSI argues that perhaps the situation has changed, but there was Moi boys, St. Mary's Moi boys in Busia, Mundika. Yeah, so unless the school calls and disputes, but otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, when I was finishing school around early 2000, we had St. Mary's Moi boys High School Mundika, the very first one that we ever had of.
Kennedy, are you taking this one?
No. I have been to Busia more than 100 times. Yeah. Busia is my neighboring county. I have not heard of Moi boys Mundika.
But Busia is my home.
No, who are we listening to?
I think I would support Echesa because you can see that wherever there is and you see these schools juxtapose one another.
Yes.
Where there is a boys' school, there is a girls' school. But Moi had a very high affinity towards the girls' schools, and
why
I can
do you think that was
say
the
though
case?
because just right, Friends School Kamsinga is a boys' school. Moi Girls Kamsinga is just miles away.
Why do you think?
And the high affinity of Moi towards the girls' school can actually be taken to be on the merit side of it. Most likely, Moi was cognizant of the fact that our sisters need to actually be supported. Since you are a girl in this part of Africa, and you know that male chauvinism and the position of a man has been much more masculine kind of.
Yes.
So I fully support the late president. And he has been much more contributory in terms of empowering the girl child. So I have no problem.
Okay. So I'll leave now the debate to Trevor to decide if he will believe Amos or Echesa.
Now they all come from there.
But there's this false perception that the schools called Moi Girls were started by Moi. Some of these schools were just taken over, and Moi made attempts to name schools after himself. I know for a fact that Sacred Heart Mkumu Girls had been named Moi Girls, and the bishop rejected.
Initially.
The bishop said, we can't call this school Moi Girls.
No, but
and Moi rushed to Shibuye and named St. Agnes Shibuye, called it Arap Moi Girls Shibuye. And when Moi left power, his lordship, the bishop, changed the school as now St. Agnes Shibuye Girls.
Yes. But what I was saying is whenever the name was rechanged, either earlier on or after, good tidings followed. The name itself, Moi Girls, was actually a blessing to that particular institution.
So for an institution to carry the weight, the name Moi behind it came with also certain funding.
Tidings, obviously.
Some goodies.
Moi could just pop in.
And it required a presidential visit.
His leadership was one that was actually very, a little bit queer. Moi could just pop in by virtue of that name attached to Moi Girls. In one of the afternoon, he could just pop in and all the students are summoned and he says, Leo, Wadudu, Wajinjiwe, a whole bowl. And you see, they could clap with the late president as they celebrated. Don't you think those were tidings? And even in performance, go into the archives, Kaburu and my friend, Echesa, you will see that the Moi Girls, or any institution that carried Moi as a tag, it was actually associated with excellence. So this was a blessing in disguise.
I think we should take the discussion a little bit further, just from the issue of the name. I totally dispute, for instance, what Otoa says, that the name Moi Girls was associated with good performance, for instance. I think the issue of performance is neither here nor there. But I think we need to put into context the issue of Moi and girls. And shockingly, last night I was just going through statistics when Moi was taking over power in 1978 vis-a-vis when Moi was leaving. And this is what struck me, and my wife was equally shocked, that when President Moi was taking over power in 1978, there were only 138 girls from Northeastern province who were attending secondary school.
At that time?
Yes.
In the entire country, 1978, only 138 girls were in
Girls
school.
from Northeastern province.
From Northeastern province.
Yes. Garissa, Mandera, and Wajir. Only 138. That was stunning. And this puts into sharp focus what we should be looking at in terms of Moi's legacy, as far as the traditional issues or perennial issues that we've sought to address in our education, which around equity and inclusion have been. There has been a systemic problem. And one of the shocking things would be when President Moi took over power, the first thing he did was to increase the allocations towards the Minister of Education by 10%. That was shocking because it was not expected. And so you look at the number of schools that Kenya had, less than 500 secondary schools. Secondary schools when Moi was taking over power. And he was leaving when we had more than 3,300 secondary schools. Of course, the numbers had doubled. The statistics are very shocking. In fact, by 2002, 22% of Kenyans had never gone to school.
By 2002?
2002. 43.6% of Kenyans.
Say these things slowly. There are many.
22%.
1 in out of every 5 Kenyans had not gone to school in 2002. 45% of Kenyans had never completed primary school.
45.
It's only 15% which had completed primary school. So you're talking of an entire primary school. You're talking of an entire more than 70% of Kenyans who could not access secondary school. And these are systemic problems that we've had to deal with. And when we have to understand that even when Moi made a bold decision to say that the country has to refocus its education so that it's no longer the focus towards white-collar jobs and think of 844, and when 844 collapses, what happens after that? I think it's a subject of conversation.
Here's the thing, Amos, just if hearing you taking us through these numbers and through these years, it seems like Moi inherited a weak education system, but he left it strong. Would you not say so, Kennedy?
There are two ways to it. Let me just finish on it. One of the things is to look at when Moi took over power. Kenya only had a population of 15 million people.
Right.
When President Moi was leaving, Kenya had a population of 33 million people. So the numbers had actually doubled. That's one of the things. It's also to look at what was the size of our GDP. When President Moi was taking over power, our GDP was not even 5 billion USD. It's just about 500 billion. When President Moi was leaving after 24 years, the economy had only grown to 13 billion USD compared to the 10 years that Kibaki took over, and it went to 55 billion USD, and within about 7 years that Uhuru has been in power.
So can you see that he left the education system stronger?
So there are two things to look at it. One is the aspect of the increase in population, vis-a-vis also looking at issues such as the resources that were available and how much he was so deliberate to put in education. Because when you look at the unit allocation that was going towards education was pretty low. And geopolitics plays a role to it, because the establishment of the Paris Club with this, what you call structural adjustment programs, the SAPs, that introduced what you call cost sharing in late 80s, dealt a serious blow to what Moi had thought would be education reforms through 844. So Moi really tried, but his legacy is neither here nor there. It's a bit lax.
Okay.
Wow. Chesa, what do you think?
I think Moi did his best under the circumstances, especially with regards to basic education. But I wouldn't credit Moi for doing the very best with respect to higher education. Partly because Moi had left classroom to politics, to vice presidency and to presidency. So he had some special attachment to basic education.
Yes.
Whatever policies that he put in place could be attributed to what he had experienced when he was a teacher at Tambach.
Right.
And he went a step higher and realized what he ought to have realized as a teacher. So I looked at Moi during his presidential times, first as a teacher. And that is why he had untold love for school children. This had been his former clients. contradistinguish Moi's treatment of basic education and higher education, for example. Moi was a rogue president regarding higher education. This is the period when people were suspended from universities. This is the period when when government became intolerant with regards to university education. This is the period when we had no privately sponsored students program. They restricted university education to very few people. But when Kibaki came into power and succeeded Moi, he liberalized education. Remember, the Higher Education Loans Board was funding students who had not hitherto qualified to pursue higher education through Joint Submission Board, something that Moi never accepted. Something
but then, how do you explain the movement?
That's not true.
Wait, I'll come to you. In 1987, between 1987 and 1990, the numbers increased from a paltry 3,000 to 7,000.
Exactly.
How can you then say that?
That higher education didn't accept.
Remember, that was the time that there was clamor for an open and a wide democratic space. And this was reactionary. It was not out of Moi's volition that these numbers increased. The circumstances had changed fundamentally.
Let's not misconstrue because the numbers are there.
Let him finish, then you disagree. Finish. Yeah.
I'm saying that Moi was very intolerant on university education. We are specifically to education. He might have been the best in basic education and other areas. But when you look at even key figures and the number of students who are forced to flee this country and have their higher education elsewhere, tells you that the situation in Kenya was actually difficult for higher education.
But was it
why am I saying so?
Trajectory?
There was an upward trajectory that was actually partly forced on him. It was not out of his volition.
No. I think that would be very dangerous to argue that. Let's put issues into perspective. When we had the Federal University of East Africa, chartered in 1963, made of the University College of Nairobi, University College of Makerere, and the University College of Dar es Salaam. By the time President Kenyatta was passing on, Kenya had only one university. It is during Moi's regime that the number of universities increased. We had Kenyatta University being established in 1985. Let's just finish. Yes. I think the perspective which he's taking is to look at the role of universities in democratization and governance, which is a very, very different aspect from what education is. If you go to look at the history of developing, for instance, the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Nairobi, when a few professors were called in from Makerere to come and build that faculty. You can look at the statistics, they are available. Just Google, look at what the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey tells you in 1979, what the situation was. This country could not even raise 600 graduates by the time President Moi was leaving. And by the time he was coming in, we could afford to graduate almost 8,000. A whole faculty of medicine was established at Moi University, credited to President Moi, a whole faculty of law. So let's not confuse political pluralism with what the successes in higher education are. There is so much that happened. Technical training colleges went up, and Moi was very, very emphatic as far as developing technical TVET was concerned.
Let's hear from Sifuna.
Yes.
Okay, I cannot agree with
Kennedy,
my brother Echesa, who is my kinsman. Trevor is saying here that statistics are very, very crude and they are very hostile. You cannot dispute a statistics that is in existence. But just on the very bare fact of it, Kaburu here has said there was only one university in this country by that particular timing, University of Nairobi, which was even on its knees. What Moi did, and look over a period of time, there came Moi University in Eldoret. That was, and a lot of charters were given. Look at even the mushrooming of private universities, and notably Kabarak University in that particular
starting
region.
with Daystar, the first private university in Kenya.
And all that. But what I wanted to say is that in as much as, you know, when you write the history of a hero, somebody quoted that, when you are writing the history of a hero, you write it with cognizance of the fact that he's not an angel. Yes, Moi would have been a little bit oppressive in some of the sectors, such as, and I will agree with you, maybe you are a student leader by that particular timing. When it came to democracy, especially at the university democracy and empowering of student activism and all that, Moi knew very well that if I empower a lot of activism at the institutions, most likely, and he wanted a very firm grip on even this university education. Remember George Shiwani at Kenyatta University?
Who used to say he was second to Moi.
Yes, what the guy used to do, what the late president used to do, is actually he could empower the vice chancellor to the very bone marrow, to the fact that when the vice chancellor is actually at the helm, you cannot. And if you look at it from that point of view, suffocation of the student democracy and all that, you will say that the late President Moi failed. But very crucially, the idea we are missing here is one. Did Moi leave a legacy in the education sector? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Even in the 844 that has been a hot political potato, you realize that 844 by its own formation, and a lot of educational philosophy will tell you that it was not bad. It was very bad.
In fact, there is something erroneous that we have to correct Zinzi before we lose it.
All of you are all education experts. If the late president was not a teacher by profession, would he have had the same impact on education? Would we be seated here having the same...
Yes, I think the answer is neither here nor there.
The only reason that I can say that answer is yes or to the affirmative is that Moi was a very heavy consultant. He could go and consult heavily from the professors. A lot of what Moi executed was from the educational reports, and he actually believed in what he was being advised.
And just to build on to that, so that we correct it, there's also another error that I have to correct. It is a lie to say that expansion of access to university cannot be attributed to President Moi. I want to take you down the memory lane. At Chiromo in 1998, when Professor Gishaga, the Vice Chancellor at the University of Nairobi, was forced by the students to say, comrades power. What was the reason? This was the time when President Moi allowed for what was called Module 2 to start. And this is what we call self-sponsored programs. They started in 1998. The Higher Education Loans Board Act was enacted in 1994. How can we really sit back and say that help was not there, Moi cannot be attributed? I think let's be fair to history, put the figures as they are. We can argue on the role of, and it's not just universities alone that had a role to play in terms of democratization of this country. There are even religious leaders like Okulu and other, the late Bishop Muge, who played a role. So as far as if we were discussing, if we're having a discussion on governance, we would really discuss the role of universities and what Moi did. And therefore join people like Miguna and what they are saying. But as far as we are dealing with the issues of access, quality, relevance, let's give it to let's give the old man his due. I mean, what he really deserves.
I think thank you very much, gentlemen. What I am saying, or what I appear to be saying, I'm saying Moi has left a legacy in education, but that legacy is qualified with respect to higher education. With respect to basic education, I have no doubt that Mzee did his best. But it is erroneous, misleading, and untrue to state that you can attribute expansion of higher education to President Moi.
But how do you dispute
just a minute. I have given you time. I have given you time to talk.
I
have given you time to talk. So if you have to understand me, you have to listen to me. Moi only started one university from scratch. And this was after the recommendations of the Presidential Working Committee on the formation of a second university, which previous committee had recommended that Kenyatta College near Kahawa Barracks be turned into a fully fledged university. Then Moi decided that Moi was advised by a subsequent commission that let us not turn Kenyatta into a university. Let us go to Eldoret and start a university from scratch. And that is how Moi University came into existence. We cannot mention any other university that was created from scratch. Moi then went to Maseno. He turned Siriba Teachers College into Maseno University. Moi went into Egerton. Egerton College was turned into university. JKUAT was actually a college. It was turned into a university. And towards the end times of his presidential term, in around 2003, when 1999, 2002, Masinde Muliro had been mutating from Weko to UXT to Weuko to UXT, then to Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology. And that is a culture that killed vocational training in this country, had the potential of killing it. Why? Why did we move into turning technical training colleges, teacher training colleges into universities, and then say we're expanding university education? In serious jurisdictions, people will not convert technical colleges into universities.
So if Moi's influence was not the basic in expanding the universities that we've been seeing in the country, from where you stand, what is it that influenced that then?
It was policy. And this policy...
Under whose regime?
It was under Moi's regime, under Moi's commissions. And he had no option but to implement. Remember, Moi was a president. He wasn't doing us any favor. He was a president and the commander-in-chief. He was the head of the policy. And therefore, as part of his governance programs, he had to go by what commissions had said. When we say that Moi was consulting professors, we have very many professors. We have very many professors who suffered under Moi.
Yeah, that is true.
Why we have focus on a few professors?
Gentlemen, one at a time.
I think, Echesa, let's not twist history.
Amos, let me pause you there. I want us to take a break, so when we come back, we give you more time to say your point. Okay. Sindio, just hold on to that point. Let's take that quick commercial break. We'll come back.